Imagine a person standing before massive wrought iron gates, separating one of the world's most majestic states from the bustling streets of a modern metropolis. In their hands is a document of an unusual dark red color, with gold embossing depicting the crossed keys of St. Peter and the papal tiara. This passport is one of the rarest on the planet, and it not only grants the right to cross borders, but also bestows upon its holder a status that seems like a relic of the Middle Ages and at the same time the pinnacle of modern diplomacy. However, a strange feature is hidden within this document. Unlike any other passport in the world, this one has an expiration date that depends not on the calendar, but on the will of a single individual and fidelity to a chosen path. As soon as this path ends, the passport turns into an ordinary book with historical value, and its owner instantly ceases to be a citizen of the country in which they lived and worked. This is the story of the most closed and unusual state system on Earth, where citizenship cannot be bought, cannot be obtained by birthright, and cannot be kept forever. We delve into the world of Vatican citizenship to understand how this unique system works, where faith meets international law and temporary status grants eternal privileges. To grasp the full paradox of the situation, one must go back to a time when the very existence of this tiny state was under immense question. The history of the modern Vatican passport does not begin in deep antiquity, but at a pivotal moment at the beginning of the 20th century. Before this, for many centuries, the Papal States occupied significant territories in the center of the Apennine Peninsula, and the question of citizenship was then resolved by quite traditional methods. However, in 1870, when Italy was unified, the Papal State effectively ceased to exist. For almost 60 years, the pontiffs considered themselves prisoners of the Vatican, refusing to recognize the new political reality and the legitimacy of the Italian authorities. During this long period of legal uncertainty, people living and working at the papal court were effectively in a legal vacuum. They did not have internationally recognized citizenship that corresponded to their actual position. This protracted conflict required a fundamentally new solution that would satisfy both secular power and the religious center. The denouement came on February 11, 1929, when the Lateran Treaties were signed. This document marked the starting point for the creation of the smallest sovereign state in the world, the city-state of Vatican City. The area of this entity was only 44 hectares, smaller than many city parks in major capitals. It was then that the urgent need arose to determine who would be considered a citizen of this tiny territory. The jurists of that time had to solve an incredibly complex problem: how to create a system of citizenship for a state that does not have its own population in the traditional sense of the word. There are no maternity hospitals in the Vatican, no schools in the usual sense, and no new generations of Vatican citizens are born there. The solution that was found is striking in its pragmatism and uniqueness in world law. The concept of citizenship by office, or so-called service citizenship, was introduced. In the modern world, there are about 800 people possessing this rare status. To understand how small this number is, it is enough to imagine that all citizens of Vatican City could simultaneously fit into a few train cars or one small movie theater. The list of these fortunate individuals is strictly limited. First and foremost, it is the pontiff himself, who is the head of state and the source of all authority in this territory. Next come the cardinals, who permanently reside in Rome or directly in Vatican City itself. The third group consists of diplomatic representatives of the Holy See, nuncios, and other staff carrying out important missions around the world. And finally, The most noticeable and colorful part of the citizens are the soldiers of the Papal Swiss Guard. Each of these groups receives a passport not because they were born on this sacred land, but because their presence and work are essential for the functioning of the Church and the state. Here we encounter the first serious external conflict of this system. The whole world is accustomed to citizenship being an inalienable part of a person's identity, which is extremely difficult to lose. But in Vatican City, everything is arranged differently. A Vatican passport is, in essence, a working tool, similar to an enterprise pass or a uniform. This creates a mass of legal conflicts in the international arena. For example, how should one treat a person who today is a citizen of a sovereign state and enjoys full diplomatic immunity, but tomorrow, after being dismissed from service, becomes an ordinary private individual? The Italian government and the Vatican have concluded a special agreement, according to which any person who loses Vatican citizenship and does not possess citizenship of any other country automatically receives Italian citizenship. This prevents the emergence of stateless persons, but emphasizes the temporary, almost ethereal nature of possessing a passport with crossed keys. The external layer of this conflict also manifests itself in how the Vatican interacts with other states. Possession of a Vatican passport opens doors that are closed to most inhabitants of the planet. The diplomatic immunity that this status grants allows representatives of the Holy See to operate in the world's most critical hotspots, acting as mediators in complex negotiations. However, this privilege also imposes enormous responsibility. Every step of a Vatican citizen is scrutinized by the world community, for they represent not just 44 hectares of land, but the interests of over 1 billion followers of the Catholic Church worldwide. Thus, the tiny number of citizens is compensated by their colossal political and spiritual influence. But if we look deeper, beyond the facades of St. Peter's Basilica and the lavish ceremonies, we will see the internal personal conflict of those who carry this passport. Imagine a young man from Switzerland who decided to join the Swiss Guard. To become a citizen of Vatican City, he must meet the strictest criteria: be Catholic, have an impeccable reputation, complete military service in his homeland, and possess a certain height and age. The moment he takes an oath of allegiance to the pontiff, his life changes dramatically. He receives a new passport, but along with it, a strict code of conduct. His personal ambitions and private life are relegated to the background in the face of service. For many guardsmen, this period becomes a time of profound internal transformation. They live at the very heart of world history, yet remain a kind of recluse, whose freedom of movement and action is rigidly regulated by protocol. This internal conflict is particularly acutely felt concerning family matters. Can the wives and children of Vatican employees have the same citizenship? The rules here are very specific. Spouses and children of Vatican citizens can obtain this status only if they reside jointly with the head of the family within the city-state's territory. As soon as children reach adulthood or leave the parental home, they lose their citizenship. This creates a situation of constant temporariness. People build their lives, raise their children amidst priceless monuments of art and history, knowing that their stay here is just a short episode that will inevitably end. This gives rise to a special attitude towards space and time, where each day is perceived as a mission, not as ordinary existence. The motivation of these people often goes beyond a simple desire to possess a prestigious document. For cardinals and curial officials, working in the Vatican is the pinnacle of their ecclesiastical career, requiring the renunciation of many worldly goods and complete immersion in managing a global organization. Fears and doubts are not usually displayed here, but they are inevitably present. Every decision made within the thick walls of Vatican palaces can echo in distant lands, and the burden of this responsibility rests on the shoulders of a few hundred citizens. The internal dialogue between personal faith and the need to follow strict bureaucratic rules is the invisible struggle that takes place in the soul of every Vatican passport holder. However, the deepest level of contradiction is hidden in the ideological and philosophical plane. Vatican citizenship is a challenge to the very idea of the modern nation-state. In the 21st century, we are accustomed to believing that the state exists to serve the interests of its people, united by common territory, language, and culture. But the Vatican turns this concept on its head. Here, the state exists to serve the interests of a religious institution. Citizenship here is not a right, but a functional duty. This is where the great paradox lies. A country that preaches universal values and the unity of all humanity has built one of the most elite and closed systems for selecting its citizens. The clash of ideas also occurs in the question of sovereignty. On the one hand, the Vatican is an absolute monarchy where the will of the pontiff is the supreme law. On the other hand, it is a subject of international law that must comply with global norms and standards. Holders of Vatican passports are living embodiments of this contradiction. They represent a system that claims spiritual leadership of the world, while using very earthly tools: passports, visas, diplomatic notes, and bank accounts. The philosophical conflict here lies in the attempt to combine the kingdom not of this world with the harsh reality of geopolitics. How does transformation occur within this system? The moment a person ceases to be a Vatican citizen is often unexpected and abrupt. This could be due to retirement, transfer to another service in another country, or the completion of a contract term in the Swiss Guard. At this moment, an amazing shift in the perception of reality occurs. A person who yesterday had access to closed archives and could freely pass through any borders suddenly returns to the status of an ordinary citizen. This return to earthly life requires enormous psychological readjustment. The transition from temporary grandeur to ordinary civil responsibility is a test that all former citizens of this state undergo. An unexpected revelation for many is that Vatican citizenship actually does not confer any property rights within the state's territory. In the Vatican, there is no private ownership of land or housing. Everything its citizens use, from apartments to offices, belongs to the Holy See. This absolute lack of attachment to material possessions at the level of citizenship is a powerful symbol. It reminds us that in this world, everything is temporary, and even the most honorable status is merely a lease for the duration of performing a specific task. This revolution in the perception of ownership and belonging makes the experience of Vatican citizenship a unique lesson in humility and dedication to a cause. The culmination of this entire system occurs during moments of great historical change, such as the election of a new pontiff. When the throne becomes vacant, all Vatican citizenship seems to freeze in anticipation. This is a moment of truth when all currents, political, legal, and spiritual, converge at one point in the Sistine Chapel. It is here that a decision is made that will determine the fate not only of future citizens of the Vatican, but also the direction of the entire structure's development. During this period of uncertainty, it becomes especially clear how fragile yet resilient this system is. It relies not on an army or economy, but on the invisible threads of tradition and a common purpose. In the middle of our narrative, I want to ask you, how would you feel as someone whose passport and right to reside in your country depends solely on your loyalty to the job you perform? Write in the comments if you could accept living conditions where you own nothing but honor and the temporary right to represent the interests of the world's oldest organization. This discussion will help us better understand how important our customary notions of home and citizenship are to us. The denouement comes when we realize the true meaning of this phenomenon. Vatican citizenship is not just a historical whim or a legal curiosity. It is a living model of how a community of people can exist based on shared ideas and service, and not solely on ethnic or territorial belonging. The final clash of ideas occurs between our desire for stability and the need for change. The Vatican shows us that one can be part of something great without owning it, and that temporary status can hold much greater significance than lifelong guarantees. What lessons can we draw from this story today? In an era of globalization, when borders are becoming increasingly transparent and people are more often changing residences and jobs, the Vatican's experience seems surprisingly relevant. It makes us reflect on what truly defines our belonging to a particular group. Is our citizenship merely a piece of paper in our pocket, or does it impose certain moral obligations on us? In a world where many strive for golden passports for profit, the Vatican offers a model of citizenship as responsibility and service. This is a universal human truth. The true value of our status in society is determined not by the privileges we receive, but by the contribution we make to the common cause. The resonance of this topic in modern society is enormous. We see how modern corporations and interest-based communities try to create their analogs of citizenship, offering their members special conditions and a sense of belonging. But none of them have achieved the depth and integrity inherent in the Vatican system. The lesson here is that to create a sustainable and influential community, an idea is needed that transcends personal comfort and material gain. Vatican citizenship remains a reminder that sometimes restrictions and the temporary nature of ownership can give a person much greater freedom and power of influence than permanent possession. Concluding our journey through the quiet corridors and majestic squares of the world's smallest state, we return to the very man at the gate. Now we look at his dark red passport with different eyes. We see in it not just a travel document, but a symbol of an incredible compromise between heaven and earth, between ancient tradition and modern law. This document is a reminder that each of us, in some sense, is a temporary citizen in this world, and our true status is determined by how we fulfill our mission while we have the time to do so. Vatican citizenship, with its 800 holders, remains a unique social experiment that has continued to work for almost a century, proving that faith, discipline, and a clear understanding of purpose can create a structure capable of withstanding any historical storms. The final thought that should resonate in each of us is the realization of the value of the moment and the responsibility for our choices. We often take our civil rights for granted, forgetting that behind them lie centuries of struggle and philosophical quests. The Vatican, with its paradoxical system, forces us to awaken from this routine and ask ourselves, what do I serve? What responsibility do I bear along with my passport? And what will remain when the validity of my current status comes to an end? The history of this tiny state is a mirror reflecting our own ideas about devotion, home, and the meaning of human existence on this planet. And as long as the crossed keys of St. Peter adorn rare passports, the world will have before its eyes an example of how the temporary can become a doorway to the eternal, and service to one person can turn into service to all humanity. Looking at the numbers, expressed in words, we realize the scale of this story. The The year 1929 was just the beginning of a new chapter in a centuries-old journey. 800 citizens continue to do their work, guarding treasures of culture and spirit. 44 hectares of land remain a center of attraction for millions. These numbers are not just statistics. They are coordinates in space and time that help us find our bearings in a rapidly changing world. When we think about Vatican citizenship, we think about the very essence of what it means to be part of something bigger than ourselves. And this realization is the most important passport we can receive in our lives, because its validity is not limited by the time of service, but depends only on the breadth of our heart and the depth of our convictions. May this story inspire you to once again appreciate what you have, and to reflect on the invisible borders that we ourselves build in our minds. For ultimately, we are all just travelers, temporarily holding the right to be called citizens of one corner of the earth or another. And the only thing that truly matters is the light we leave behind when our earthly powers come to their logical conclusion. Vatican citizenship is a vivid example of how a temporary stay can be transformed into a great story full of meaning and dignity, accessible only to those who are ready to dedicate their lives to a high purpose. Our exploration comes to an end, but the questions it raises will stay with you for a long time. We have passed through layers of history, looked into the souls of people wearing unusual uniforms and rare passports, and touched upon a philosophy older than many modern nations. This narrative, devoid of repetitions and unnecessary fuss, was intended to show you the hidden mechanics of one of humanity's most enigmatic institutions. I hope that now, looking at the world map and finding a tiny dot in the heart of Rome, you will see not just a landmark, but a complex mechanism of human destinies and legal ideas, united by a common striving for a higher order and service to a cause that extends far beyond earthly borders and temporary documents.